Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with key words that made headlines this week. Chinese leader Xi Jinping presided over a massive military parade in Beijing's Tiananmen Square this week to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Among the guests at the event were Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un in a show of unity. President Lee Jae-myung will be traveling to New York later this month to address the UN General Assembly. He will become the first South Korean leader to preside over a United Nations Security Council meeting after South Korea assumed the presidency of the 15-member body this month. South Korea's current account surplus in July reached over $10 billion, the highest figure on record for the month of July. This was mainly driven by strong semiconductor exports. A historic moment was captured at a military parade in Beijing this week as the leaders of North Korea, China, and Russia came together for the first time in decades. China also unveiled its newest weapons at the event in an apparent show of force against the West. Our Shinayong reports.
A military parade marking China's 80th Victory Day anniversary became the stage for the leaders of North Korea, China, and Russia to appear together for the first time in 66 years. The 70-minute-long celebration kicked off on Wednesday at 9 a.m. local time in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. About an hour before the official ceremony, around 25 world leaders began arriving at the venue, walking down a red carpet. Chinese President Xi Jinping greeted them, with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un entering just before Russian President Vladimir Putin, who was the last to arrive. Symbolic moments of solidarity among Pyongyang, Beijing, and Moscow continued throughout the event. With Xi in the center, Kim on his left, and Putin on his right, the three leaders walked up to the rostrum side by side, conversing with smiles. China marks September 3, 1945 as the day of its victory over Japan and the end of World War II. That's the day after Japan signed its unconditional surrender to China and the other allies.
History warns us that the destiny of humankind is closely interconnected. Only when nations and peoples treat each other as equals, live together in harmony, and support one another can we safeguard common security and eliminate the root causes of war. We must not allow the tragedies of history to repeat themselves.
During the military parade, China showcased strategic weapons for the first time, including the F-H-97 unmanned combat aircraft and the DF-61 intercontinental ballistic missile, reportedly an upgrade from the DF-41. A record 40,000 people took part in the parade, with 45 military units also marching through Tiananmen Square to display their strength. Meanwhile, from South Korea, National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik attended the parade. Shinayong, 아리랑뉴스.
And National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik met with China's top legislator Zhao Leji in Beijing on Thursday to discuss strengthening diplomatic ties. Speaker Woo emphasized South Korea's commitment to improving relations by his participation in the recent Victory Day ceremony and urged President Xi Jinping to attend the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju this year. He also addressed the sensitive issue of China's installations in the disputed areas of the sea, calling for a careful handling of the matter. Woo concluded by requesting a more predictable business environment for Korean companies and advocating for expanded cultural exchanges. Delving deeper into China's Victory Day parade this week, we take a look at how the closely watched scenes are being interpreted here in Seoul. The gathering of the leaders of North Korea, China, and Russia sent a strong signal across the region, and their diplomacy could have major impact here on the Korean Peninsula. For more on this, we have our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young in the studio with us. Welcome, Soo-young.
Hi, Eunji. It's great to be back here.
So, Soo-young, this was the first time in 66 years that the leaders from three sides got together in Beijing. Let's start with the significance of that.
Sure, indeed. So on Wednesday, the leaders of North Korea, China and Russia put on a united front throughout China's major military parade. It was a show of force unseen since the days of the Cold War and certainly hardened present-day fault lines in the Indo-Pacific region, directed towards South Korea's strengthened trilateral cooperation with the United States and Japan.
China and Russia have openly declared that they intend to advance a so-called multipolar international order, which will revolve around the Global South, BRICS, and Eurasian states. Their gathering reflected that push. Second, it signaled a countermessage to the U.S. and the West, considering the recent South Korea-U.S. summit and their solidarity with Japan, reinforcing bloc confrontation in the region.
For Kim Jong-un, it also underscored his push for recognition of North Korea as a nuclear power, and his inspection of a missile production factory before travelling to China appears intended for such projection, as his on-site visit was reported by state media for foreign distribution, but not circulated domestically.
Right, and it was also Kim's first attendance at a multilateral event, and he even brought his young daughter Chue to Beijing, right?
Yes, that was really interesting. And it was, again, the occasion did mark Kim Jong-un's first participation in a gathering of many world leaders, a notable departure from the one-on-one summits that have defined his diplomacy so far. Now, we saw him hold summits with President Xi and President Putin, and also engage with other state officials, even inviting the leader of Belarus to Pyongyang and shaking hands with South Korea's National Assembly Speaker Won-sik. Now, this all appears to show that the North Korean leader is ready for more active diplomacy, with newfound confidence, it seems, in his coalition with Beijing and Moscow. Now, what's more, as you mentioned, he's taken his daughter under his wing, it seems. We saw the scene of him arriving at Beijing railway station with his teenage daughter Kim Jue in tow, receiving treatment akin to North Korea's number 2, and some view this as a clear succession signal.
When Kim Jong-un turned 8 years old, his father tapped him as his successor. However, as he was not given sufficient diplomatic training, he remained a leader of an isolated state until he participated in the summits with China, South Korea, and the United States in 2018. Determined not to pass down this unfortunate experience to his daughter, Kim Jong-un seems to have brought her to China, firmly resolved to introduce her early onto the diplomatic stage and provide her with systematic training.
Well, some believe that Kim Jue is not the heir in training, but simply there as an iconic figure for the regime, like a member of the royal family. Of course, only time will tell whether she will succeed him or not, but her presence there was entirely unexpected and entirely interesting.
And Seoul and Washington hope to revive the dialogue with Pyongyang. What are the chances of that?
For now, Pyongyang really has very little incentive to talk, as it benefits from Russia's war in Ukraine, with troop deployments and arms supplies exchanged for economic and diplomatic returns.
If the war ends quickly, U.S.-North Korea dialogue will draw closer, and in that extension, inter-Korean dialogue cannot be ruled out. But if the war drags on for a long time, North Korea will continue pressuring the South under a hostile two-state framework. Also, while the U.S. and North Korea may exchange signals of interest, North Korea will demand actual policy changes, such as an end to the hostile policy. If this tug-of-war continues, inter-Korean and U.S.-North Korea dialogue will both take considerable time.
At the same time, the potential end of the Ukraine war could mean that Kim has to keep his options open. This means shoring up ties with China and pressing for deeper economic cooperation.
From Kim's perspective, it would be the North Korean-style division of labor, the economy from China, security from Russia, reaping benefits from both. Still, if talks to end the Ukraine war do take place and move forward, U.S.-North Korea dialogue could open up. In that dialogue, North Korea would seek to leverage China's backing to pressure the U.S. This reflects a calculated diplomatic strategy.
For South Korea and the U.S., China adds another layer of complexity.
China's decision to invite Kim underscores its role as a key player in Korean Peninsula and regional affairs, displaying Beijing's firm influence on the North. The message is that Seoul and Washington must maintain amicable ties with China if they want to improve relations with the North.
It's a leverage Xi Jinping clearly flaunted as he elevated Kim Jong-un's treatment with special protocol in Tiananmen Square. Now, there is also speculation that Kim may have consulted with Xi Jinping about the possibility of reviving dialogue with Washington, just as he did in 2018.
Right, and South Korea is aiming to get China on board. How is this working out?
Well, South Korea, as you know, is hosting the APEC leaders meeting this October in Gyeongju and hopes to see the leaders of the US, China and even North Korea there. Attending the Victory Day parade instead of President Lee Jae-myung, though, National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik has invited Xi Jinping to APEC once again. And it remains unclear, though, whether the Chinese leader will accept.
China initially had high hopes at the start of the Lee administration, but despite stressing pragmatic, national interest-based diplomacy, Lee prioritized a summit with Japan and reaffirmed its alliance with Washington. That likely displeased Beijing.
For now, Seoul said it will continue strengthening the South Korea-US alliance while pursuing mature relations with China, while requesting Beijing play a more constructive role in Korean Peninsula affairs. And in terms of North Korea diplomacy, Seoul officials have cautioned against premature optimism, warning that Pyongyang shows no signs of abandoning its nuclear program. Of course, while South Korea and the US say they remain committed to reviving dialogue with Pyongyang, both allies maintain their push for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
The Victory Day parade presented a very complicated reality indeed. All right, thanks for coming in today, Seong. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
President Lee Jae-myung chaired a cabinet meeting this week, and the 2-hour discussion on South Korea's new growth engines was aired live. Our presidential office correspondent Song Yoo-jin has the details.
The second of President Lee Jae-myung's cabinet meeting discussions to be broadcast live centered on ways to boost South Korea's economic growth. President Lee opened Tuesday's session by highlighting encouraging figures from the domestic economy.
7월 산업 생산, 소비, 설비 투자가 나란히 증가세로 전환됐다고 합니다. 현장 민생과 직결된 소매 판매의 경우에는 소비 쿠폰 지급에 힘입어서 29개월 만에 가장 큰 폭으로 증가했습니다.
But he also sounded the alarm over the country's weakening potential growth rate, which is already in the upper 1% range and projected to dip to the low 1% range by the end of the decade.
적극 재정 그리고 생산적 금융을 양대 마중물로 삼아서 신기술 혁신 지원, 규제 개혁, 산업 재편, 인재 양성 등을 포괄하는 범정부 차원의 종합 대책을 신속하게 수립해서 추진해야 합니다.
That said, the floor was open to the ministers to weigh in on the challenges and possible solutions.
Our economy is under strain from a shrinking workforce, weak investment, and stagnant productivity, driving down growth potential. We've also fallen behind in AI and green transitions, while U.S. tariffs are reshaping global trade, leaving not only smaller firms, but even major corporations struggling.
The finance minister noted that a significant portion of next year's 728 trillion won budget will go toward artificial intelligence development.
We'll invest in AI infrastructure to help businesses and universities expand adoption more quickly. At the same time, well-trained top-tier talent develop a homegrown foundation model and establish AI innovation hubs in Gwangju and Daegu cities, and Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-namdo provinces.
Another focus was adapting to the changing export environment shaped by the Trump administration's sweeping tariffs.
가능한 범위 내에서라면 수출 국가 다변화에 좀 주력을 좀 해야 될 것 같아요. 새로운 수출 국가 개발이나 수출 품목 개발을 좀 집중 지원하는 방식으로 차등을 두거나 아니면 아예 우선 지원하거나.
For example, the Korean wave has fueled strong demand in related sectors in the global south. We will work to reduce dependence on the U.S. market and enable our small and mid-sized firms to expand exports in these areas.
Tuesday's discussion reflected the president's commitment to prioritize stabilizing people's livelihoods and finding new growth engines following his back-to-back trips to the U.S. and Japan. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang.News.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will address the UN General Assembly later this month to share his vision for peace on the Korean Peninsula. He will also lead an open debate on artificial intelligence as chair of the UN Security Council. Our senior top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
President Lee Jae-myung will attend the UN General Assembly in New York on September 23rd to address its 80th session.
President Lee will share with the international community the Republic of Korea's experience of overcoming a crisis of democracy and recovering from it. He will also present our government's vision and policies on key global issues, including the Korean Peninsula.
He is expected to lay out his vision for peace on the peninsula and resuming dialogue with North Korea. Just last week, the heads of South Korea and the U.S. met and shared their thoughts on resuming dialogue with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Eyes are also on whether there will be another Trump summit, just 4 weeks after their first meeting, with U.S. President Donald Trump also set to address the UN chamber on the same day. This comes ahead of the upcoming APEC leaders meeting in South Korea's Gyeongju this October, where Trump is also expected to attend. And the meeting means more than just that for the South Korean leader as he resumes multilateral summit diplomacy, 3 months after making his debut at the G7 summit in Canada.
President Lee will strengthen solidarity with the international community and carry out various diplomatic activities to enhance Korea's status as a responsible global power.
South Korea has assumed the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council for the month of September, and Lee will preside over an open debate on September 24th on AI and related global peace. He will be the first South Korean president to lead such a session as chair. The presidential office says it hopes this will serve to reaffirm Korea's global standing as a trusted partner and bolster its leadership in multilateral summit diplomacy. Yoon Jung-min, 아리랑뉴스.
On the economic front, the South Korean economy expanded 0.7% in the second quarter of this year, higher than previous projections. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young reports.
South Korea's economy grew faster than earlier estimated in the second quarter, driven by robust exports and improved private consumption. Preliminary data released by the Bank of Korea on Wednesday revealed that the nation's real gross domestic product, a key economic indicator, grew by 0.7% quarter-on-quarter in the April to June period this year. This revised figure marks an improvement of 0.1 percentage point from the advanced estimate made in July. The growth also represents a significant rebound from a contraction experienced in the first quarter. Last week, the central bank upgraded its economic growth forecast for this year to 0.9%, up from its previous projection of 0.8%.
If the economy grows around 0.6% on quarter in the second half, we will be able to achieve 0.9% annual growth.
Breaking down the growth drivers, private spending saw a 0.5% increase, largely due to higher spending on automobiles and health services. Government expenditure also climbed 1.2%, boosted by increased healthcare benefits. However, construction investment contracted, primarily driven by a decrease in civil engineering projects. Facilities investment also declined due to reduced demand for ships and semiconductor manufacturing equipment. In terms of trade, exports surged by 4.5%, spurred by strong global demand for semiconductors and petroleum and chemical products. Imports were also up by 4.2%.
We expect domestic demand to continue its modest recovery, led by the government's supplementary budget execution and better consumer sentiment. However, while exports showed a favorable trend in July and August, we anticipate growth to gradually slow as the impact of U.S. tariff impositions expands.
Meanwhile, the country's gross national income saw a 2% increase, with real GNI growing by 1%. This was largely due to improved terms of trade, which led to a reduction in real trade losses. Moon Ji-young, 아리랑뉴스.
And South Korea recorded its largest current account surplus for any July thanks to strong exports. The Bank of Korea said on Thursday that the country's current account surplus reached $10.78 billion in July, extending its streak of surpluses for the 27th consecutive month. The goods account logged a $10.27 billion surplus for the month as exports advanced 2.3% from the same month last year. This was mainly driven by semiconductor exports, which surged by more than 30% year-on-year, while those of automobiles also rose more than 6%. The tragic crash of the historic Gloria funicular in Lisbon has left 16 victims dead, of which 2 have been identified as South Korean nationals. A mass was held at the site of the accident Thursday night, and an investigation was launched by local authorities, with all funiculars in Lisbon shut down for technical inspections. Our Yunjin has the details.
In the tragic crash of the historic Gloria funicular, 16 people were killed and more than 20 others injured. On Wednesday around 6:15 p.m. local time, Lisbon's 140-year-old funicular train, which is popular with tourists, derailed and crashed into a building. Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa and Prime Minister Luis Montenegro visited the site of the funicular accident on Thursday evening for a mass in honor of the 16 victims of the crash. Prime Minister Montenegro called the crash one of the biggest human tragedies in the country's recent history, and President Rebelo de Sousa told journalists that it was a time to mourn the deceased and to console their family members.
Today is a national day of mourning. It's mourning for Lisbon, but also for Portugal. In this hour of mourning, we are waiting for a time when, first and foremost, we must mourn the dead, respect the dead. Believers pray for the dead. Non-believers think of the dead.
The yellow funicular that carried many tourists up and down a steep hillside in Lisbon was left overturned on the cobblestone street. Of the 16 victims, the coroner has so far identified the bodies of 5 Portuguese, 2 South Koreans, and 1 Swiss national.
5 Portuguese citizens have been fully identified through scientific methods. 2 South Korean citizens. We have had close collaboration with the South Korean embassy from the outset. And 1 identified Swiss victim identified through Interpol.
Among those not yet officially identified may be 2 Canadians, 1 Ukrainian, and 1 German. It is not known how many passengers were on board when the crash happened. And an investigation has now been launched by Lisbon prosecutors, police, and the Transport Accident Investigation Department. Carish, the company that operates Lisbon's buses, trams, and funiculars, said all of its funiculars and its vertical lifts in the capital had been shut down for technical inspections, which would take place in the coming days. 이은진, 아리랑 뉴스.
One of South Korea's largest and boldest fashion events, Seoul Fashion Week, is back in a very different way this year by turning the city itself into a runway. Our Park Hyo-bin takes us there.
Fashion, stars, and a runway by the palace walls. Seoul Fashion Week is back for its 2026 spring-summer season, offering a glimpse of the trends that will shape styles in the coming year. Marking its 25th anniversary, this year's event goes beyond the traditional venue at Dongdaemun Design Plaza, spreading across the entire city of Seoul. And the week began right here along the stone walls of Deoksugung Palace with a striking opening show by Anderson Bell.
I've always followed Anderson Bell, and since the show is held here along the Deoksugung Palace walls, I was really excited to come.
I've been attending the event for about 3 or 4 years now. I didn't want to miss it this time either. The runway today is what I'm looking forward to most, especially because it's a brand I've always liked.
Before the runway began, the area around the palace was already filled with stars and fans alike. On the photo wall, big names like Tomorrow by Together's Hyunin Kai, Hearts to Hearts Ian and Tsiu, and IVE's Gaeul drew the crowds. Once the opening runway show kicked off, Anderson Bell unveiled its 2026 spring-summer collection under the theme Surfed Clash. The pieces highlighted unexpected color matches, layered silhouettes that looked effortless yet calculated, and deconstructed details with a worn-in edge. And Deoksugung Palace is not the only iconic location to serve as a backdrop. Throughout the week, 27 Korean designer brands take turns presenting their collections at Seoul landmarks, including the Oil Tank Culture Park, Heungcheonsa Temple, and of course, Dongdaemun Design Plaza. Adding a global touch, Berlin Fashion Week also joined Seoul Fashion Week for the first time, showcasing its official Berlin showroom.
The event runs until this Sunday, turning Seoul into a global fashion city. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
South Korea's art scene is buzzing with events this month. At the center are Kiev Seoul and Free Seoul, showcasing works from leading galleries both at home and abroad. Our culture correspondent Park Gon-woo gives us a glimpse.
Wall after wall is filled with creativity. Creative artwork from a jumbo sculpture made of 500,000 Korean pennies to a three-dimensional piece that makes you feel as if it's alive is exhibited. To make this happen, the 24th edition of Kiev Seoul brought together more than 170 galleries, with a third of them from overseas. Newcomers also joined, reflecting growing interest in Seoul's art market.
Korea has a very interesting, a real openness to the rest of the world. Culturally, very excited, to see how we could present our artists and our creation to the local Korean landscape, and especially in Seoul, already discussing with other, artist curators to actually see how we could potentially work together.
This art fair, showcasing thousands of pieces, goes beyond viewing artwork. It also serves as a marketplace and a platform for networking. At the same time, the organizers are making efforts to encourage developing artists. Since 2023, Kiev has been selecting 3 artists from 10 semifinalists, providing both funding and promotion. One of this year's semifinalists shared why his works drew global attention.
Because I use traditional Korean materials like mok and hanji, my monochrome work stood out among the more colorful pieces. With growing global interest in Korean culture, this sentiment seems to resonate.
Free Seoul, which is collaborating with Kiev for a 4th year, also has a bunch to appeal to. One section that draws eyes is Focus Asia, which showcases artwork by emerging Asian artists and galleries.
I'm expecting to see just a greater focus on Asian artists. I started collecting Korean art a while ago, and I've been to Seoul 6 times. This might seem like a good opportunity to see a lot of different galleries at once from all over.
Among the highlights was Floating Rubble, which creates the illusion of rubble suspended in midair. And works by renowned masters, including Park So-bo, also appeared, some recreated digitally for a fresh experience. Media art installations, including one with the concept of being caught on fire, also drew interest. With record crowds flocking in on opening day, the twin art fairs are expected to attract even more through the weekend, making Seoul's art scene livelier than ever. Park Gon-woo, Arirang
Now that's all we have for this edition of Weekly News Highlights. Thanks for watching.